The auctioneer's hammer hadn't even fallen yet when the room went silent. Julian's Auctions, Beverly Hills, November 2013. Among the items up for bid, Marilyn Monroe's personal effects, movie costumes, handwritten notes, was something no one expected. A manila folder marked with Dr. Michael Gurdin's medical practice stamp. Inside, surgical records, x-rays, physician's notes. The kind of documents that should have been destroyed decades ago or locked away forever in medical confidentiality. But here they were, about to become public. And what they revealed would rewrite everything the world thought it knew about Marilyn Monroe's face. The documents detailed a procedure from before the platinum hair, before the name change, before anyone knew who was, a chin augmentation, performed with cartilage taken from behind her right ear. It was subtle, it was secret, and it was the key to understanding how a pretty girl from the San Fernando Valley transformed into the most photographed face of the 20th century. But the files revealed something else, something darker. Follow-up notes from 1958 showed complications. The graft had shifted. Monroe was experiencing pain. The very surgery that had made her a star was slowly betraying her. For over 60 years, this secret had stayed buried, and when it finally emerged in that Beverly Hills auction room, it forced a reckoning with a question no one wanted to ask: how much of the beauty we worship is real, and how much is just carefully crafted illusion? The answer, in Marilyn's case, was more complicated and more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Before we continue with this untold story, please subscribe to our channel for more hidden Hollywood secrets that changed history forever. Los Angeles, early 1949. Norma Jean Mortensen sat in yet another photographer's studio, watching the man behind the camera shake his head with that expression she'd come to recognize too well. Not quite disappointment, not quite rejection. Something worse, professional assessment. The kind of look that said you're close, but not quite there. She was 22 years old, signed to a contract with Columbia Pictures that paid $90 a week, and she was beginning to understand that in Hollywood's golden age, pretty wasn't enough. You had to be camera pretty. And there was a difference. The photographer, a veteran who'd shot everyone from Rita Hayworth to Lana Turner, gestured for her to come look at the contact sheets spread across his light table. Under the harsh examination of the magnifying loupe, Norma Jean could see what he meant. Her face in those test shots was undeniably beautiful in person, the kind of beauty that made men stop on the street. But through the camera's eye, something was missing. The angles weren't quite sharp enough. The jawline melted into her neck in certain lights. Her chin, soft and rounded, created shadows that pooled beneath it, making her face look fuller than it was, less defined than the camera demanded. "You see here," the photographer said, pointing to a series of profile shots, "the light hits you here, and then there's this soft area. It's not bad, understand, but it's not what the studios want right now. They want faces that cut like diamonds. Look at Lauren Bacall. Look at Gene Tierney. Their faces have architecture." Architecture. The word stuck with Norma Jean long after she left that studio. She understood what he meant. In Hollywood's competitive landscape of 1949, where hundreds of beautiful girls arrived every month hoping to be discovered, you needed more than beauty. You needed the right kind of beauty, the kind that photographed like sculpture, that gave cinematographers something to work with, that looked iconic on a movie poster. She had the smile, the figure, the presence, but her face, for all its charm, was too soft for the harsh demands of black and white film and studio lighting. It was a problem that couldn't be solved with makeup or lighting tricks. It was a structural issue, something fundamental about the shape of her face, and in 1949 Hollywood, there was a solution for that. The studio system of Hollywood's golden age operated with an efficiency that would seem shocking by today's standards. When a studio signed a contract player, they didn't just get an actor. They got raw material to be molded, shaped and engineered into exactly what the market demanded. MGM had perfected this system to an art form. They had dentists on staff who capped teeth and fixed overbites. They had hairdressers who experimented with different colors until they found the shade that photographed best. They had makeup artists who studied bone structure and knew exactly how to create illusions with shadow and light. And they had cosmetic surgeons, discreet professionals who worked quietly behind the scenes, never mentioned in studio publicity, publicity, but essential to the creation of stars. John Harlow hadn't been born platinum blonde. That was a studio decision, a calculated move that made her stand out in an era when most leading ladies were brunettes. Judy Garland's teeth were capped, her nose was considered for alteration, and she was put on a regime of diet pills and stimulants that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Rita Hayworth underwent electrolysis to raise her hairline, transforming her from Margarita Cancino into a more Anglo-looking star that audiences would accept as a leading lady. This was the system that Norma Jean found herself in. A system that saw beauty not as something you were born with, but as something that could be manufactured, refined, perfected. And if you wanted to succeed, you played by the rules. You let the studio dentists work on your teeth. You let the hairdressers experiment with your hair. You went on the diets they prescribed, took the pills they offered, wore the clothes they selected, and if they suggested a small surgical procedure that might improve how you photographed, you seriously considered it. Because the alternative was going back to the modeling agencies, the bit parts, the endless cycle of auditions where you were always just a little bit, not quite right. Norma Jean had worked too hard to go back to that. She'd survived a childhood in foster homes, a teenage marriage that ended in divorce, years of struggling to break into an industry that chewed up and spat out hundreds of girls just like her. She'd posed for that nude calendar when she was desperate for rent money, a decision that could have ended her career before it started. She wasn't about to let something as fixable as her chin line stand between her and stardom. So when someone suggested she consult with Dr. Michael Gurdin, one of the most respected cosmetic surgeons in Los Angeles, she made the appointment. Dr. Michael Gurdin's office on Wilshire Boulevard was the kind of place where Hollywood's secrets were kept. No flashy signs, no celebrity photographs on the walls, nothing that would attract attention or suggest that this was where stars came to be perfected. Gurdin understood discretion. In an era when cosmetic surgery was still somewhat taboo, when stars were supposed to be naturally beautiful, his reputation was built on his ability to make subtle changes that looked like nothing had been done at all. He specialized in what today would be called natural-looking results. No dramatic transformations, no obvious alterations, just small refinements that made a significant difference in how someone photographed, a slightly more defined nose, a jawline that caught the light better, a chin that gave the face more structure. When Norma Jean sat in his consultation room sometime in late 1949 or early 1950, the exact date lost to history, Gurdin examined her face with the eye of an artist studying a sculpture that was 95% perfect. He could see what the photographers meant. She had beautiful features, striking eyes, a smile that lit up a room, but that chin, so soft and rounded, was creating a problem for the camera. In person, it was charming. On film, under the harsh lights of a movie set, it was making her face look less defined than it needed to be. The solution Gurdin proposed was elegant in its simplicity. A small cartilage graft, harvested from behind her right ear where the scar would be invisible, placed carefully along her chin line to give it more projection and definition. The procedure would be done under local anesthesia. She'd be back to work within a week. No one would know. The change would be subtle enough that people would just think she'd lost weight or found a better makeup artist. But the camera would know, and that was what mattered. The surgery itself was performed in Gurdin's private clinic, away from prying eyes and gossip columnists. The medical records that would surface 63 years later described a straightforward procedure. A small incision behind the right ear, careful harvesting of cartilage tissue, precise placement along the mandible to enhance the chin's projection, sutures, bandages, post-operative instructions. For Gurdin, it was a routine procedure, one he'd performed dozens of times. For Norma Jean, it was the final piece of her transformation. When the bandages came off and the swelling subsided, she could see the difference immediately. Her face had changed in a way that was hard to pinpoint but impossible to ignore. The jawline was sharper. The chin had definition. In profile, her face now had that coveted architecture the photographer had talked about. She looked like a star. The months following the surgery marked one of the most dramatic transformations in Hollywood history. Norma Jean Mortensen was disappearing, and Marilyn Monroe was being born. The chin surgery was just one piece of a complete reinvention. Around the same time, she made the decision to go platinum blonde, a shade so bright it was almost white. The hair color combined with her newly refined features created a look that was striking, memorable, impossible to ignore. Photographers who had been lukewarm about her before suddenly couldn't get enough. The camera, that cruel judge that had found her wanting just months before, now loved everything about her. Her face photographed like a dream. Those new angles caught the light perfectly. The shadows that had pooled under her chin were gone, replaced by clean lines that gave her face a classical beauty. Fashion photographers started requesting her specifically. Magazine editors who'd never heard of her were suddenly interested. By late 1950, she was appearing in small roles in films, catching the eye of directors and producers who saw something special on screen. That indefinable quality that separated a pretty girl from a star. But what no one knew, what couldn't be discussed in the carefully crafted publicity stories about the natural beauty from California, was that part of what they were responding to had been engineered. The face they were falling in love with had been subtly, carefully altered to meet the camera's demands. In 1951, she signed with Fox and her career began its meteoric rise. The studio publicity machine went into overdrive, creating the Marilyn Monroe mythology. She was the girl next door who became a goddess, the natural beauty who needed no artifice, the blonde bombshell who was just born that way. Every interview, every magazine profile, every publicity photograph reinforced this narrative. And Marilyn, understanding the game better than most, played along perfectly. She never mentioned the surgery, never hinted that her transformation had been anything but natural. The medical records stayed locked away in Dr. Gurdin's files, just another secret in a city built on illusions, and for years the illusion held perfectly. The world saw Marilyn Monroe as the ultimate natural beauty, proof that some women were just blessed by genetics. What they didn't see was the careful construction, the Hollywood engineering that had helped create that face. The first signs of trouble appeared in 1958, 9 years after the surgery that had helped launch her career. Marilyn was at the height of her fame, one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. She'd starred in Some Like It Hot, one of the greatest comedies ever made. She was married to playwright Arthur Miller, adding intellectual credibility to her sex symbol status. On the surface, everything looked perfect, but Marilyn was experiencing something she couldn't explain to anyone. A pain along her jawline, subtle at first but growing more persistent. A sensation of pressure under her chin, like something was shifting beneath the skin. Some days it was just an annoyance, other days it was sharp enough to make her wince when she touched her face or turned her head a certain way. She went back to Dr. Gurdin, now a familiar face, after years of being her trusted surgeon for various minor procedures. The examination revealed what Gurdin had perhaps feared might happen eventually. The cartilage graft he'd placed so carefully in 1949 had shifted position. Cartilage, unlike solid implants, has some flexibility. Over 9 years of facial movements, expressions, the constant work of being Marilyn Monroe with every smile and pout, photographed and analyzed, the graft had migrated slightly from its original position. The medical notes Gurdin made in 1958, which would be discovered decades later, described the situation with clinical precision. The graft had moved laterally and was creating pressure on surrounding tissue. This was causing the pain Marilyn was experiencing. The solution would be another procedure to either reposition or remove the graft. But there was a problem that went beyond the medical. Marilyn Monroe couldn't afford any publicity about cosmetic surgery. Not in 1958, when her entire image was built on natural beauty. Not when she was fighting to be taken seriously as an actress, and any hint of artifice would be used against her. Not when every aspect of her life was scrutinized by a press that was growing increasingly critical of her. So she lived with the pain. She took aspirin when it got bad. She learned to avoid touching certain parts of her face. She got through photo shoots and film sets and public appearances while managing a constant, nagging discomfort that no one around her knew about. This was the hidden cost of the transformation that had made her a star. The surgery that had given her the face that launched 1,000 magazine covers was now causing her daily pain. And she couldn't tell anyone, because telling anyone would mean admitting the surgery had happened in the first place. The irony would have been obvious to Marilyn if she'd had time to reflect on it. Here she was, the woman the whole world wanted to be, the ultimate symbol of beauty and desirability, living with a secret discomfort that complicated her already complicated life. She was struggling with chronic insomnia, increasingly reliant on sleeping pills and barbiturates. Her marriage to Arthur Miller was deteriorating. The pressures of fame and the studio system were crushing her. And now, on top of everything else, her face hurt. The very face that had made her famous, that had been so carefully constructed to meet Hollywood's standards, was betraying her. During the filming of Let's Make Love in 1960, there were days when the pain was sharp enough that she had trouble concentrating. She'd be in the middle of a scene and have to fight the urge to touch her jaw, to press her fingers against the spot where the cartilage was causing problems. The director and crew chalked up her distraction to her usual difficulties, her reputation for being late and unprepared. They didn't know she was managing physical pain on top of everything else. By 1961, as she filmed The Misfits in the Nevada desert, her last completed film, the pain had become a constant companion, not always sharp, but always there, a reminder that even her face, that supposedly perfect face, came with a cost. When Marilyn Monroe died on August 5, 1962, at the age of 36, the world mourned the loss of a legend. The circumstances of her death would be investigated, debated, and analyzed for decades. Conspiracy theories would swirl, books would be written, documentaries would be made. But through all of that examination of her life and death, one secret remained completely hidden. The chin surgery, performed 13 years earlier, stayed locked away in Dr. Gurdin's medical files. The doctor, bound by medical confidentiality even after his patient's death, never spoke publicly about the procedures he'd performed on Marilyn Monroe. The files sat in his office, then in storage, passing through various hands over the decades, their significance unknown to most people who saw them. Meanwhile, the myth of Marilyn Monroe's natural beauty grew stronger. She became the eternal symbol of feminine perfection, the woman whose face defined beauty for an entire generation. Fashion models tried to copy her look. Actresses studied her films to understand her magnetism. Women around the world permed their hair and bleached it blonde, trying to capture some of that Marilyn magic. And no one knew that the face they were trying to emulate had been carefully, surgically refined to meet the camera's demands. November 2013. Julian's Auctions in Beverly Hills announced a major auction of Marilyn Monroe memorabilia. The publicity materials promised rare items, personal effects, items that had never been seen before by the public. Among the items listed were medical records from Dr. Michael Gurdin. At first, the auction house probably didn't realize the significance of what they had. Medical records from a cosmetic surgeon who'd treated Monroe decades ago. Interesting from a collector's standpoint, certainly, but not headline-making material. Then someone actually read the files. The surgical notes from 1949 describing the chin augmentation procedure. The follow-up notes from 1958 describing the complications and shifted graft. X-rays showing the placement of the cartilage. Detailed physician's notes in Gurdin's own handwriting. This wasn't just memorabilia. This was proof that Hollywood's most famous natural beauty had undergone cosmetic surgery to achieve her iconic look. When the media got hold of this information before the auction, it became international news. Headlines around the world announced the revelation. Marilyn Monroe had a chin implant. The face that launched a million dreams had been surgically enhanced. The reaction was fascinating in what it revealed about our relationship with beauty and celebrity. Some people felt betrayed, as if Marilyn had been lying to them all these years. Others defended her, arguing that she'd done what she needed to do to succeed in a brutal industry with impossible standards. Plastic surgeons weighed in with professional opinions about the procedure and its complications. Marilyn Monroe scholars debated what this meant for her legacy. Did it diminish her beauty to know it had been partly manufactured, or did it make her more sympathetic, more human, to understand the lengths she'd gone to in pursuit of stardom? The files sold at auction for $25,000, a significant sum that reflected their historical importance. They now sit in a private collection, a paper trail of the hidden architecture behind one of history's most famous faces. But beyond their value as collectibles, these documents forced a larger conversation about beauty, authenticity, and the prices people pay for fame. Because Marilyn's story, it turned out, was more complicated than anyone had realized. She hadn't just been blessed with perfect features, she'd made calculated decisions about her appearance, undergone procedures to meet industry standards, and then lived with the physical consequences of those choices for the rest of her short life. And she'd done it all in silence, maintaining the illusion of natural perfection until long after she was gone. Looking back now, more than a decade after those medical files surfaced, we can see Marilyn Monroe's chin surgery as emblematic of something much larger. It represents the impossible standards Hollywood has always imposed on women. The gap between the image projected on screen and the reality of the person behind it. In 1949, cosmetic surgery was still relatively uncommon and definitely not something to be advertised. Unlike today, when celebrities routinely discuss their procedures and cosmetic enhancements are normalized, Marilyn lived in an era where admitting to surgery would have been career suicide. The entire star system was built on the mythology of natural beauty. Studios wanted audiences to believe their stars were just born perfect, that they'd been discovered at a soda fountain or a modeling agency, plucked from obscurity purely because of their innate gifts. To reveal the construction behind that beauty, the surgical interventions and medical procedures would have shattered the illusion. So Marilyn kept the secret, and in keeping it, she paid a price that went beyond the physical pain of the shifted cartilage. She had to maintain a public image that didn't match her private reality. She had to present herself as a natural blonde bombshell when in fact she'd been engineered, refined, and perfected according to Hollywood specifications. The chin surgery was just one piece of that construction. The platinum hair was another. The carefully managed weight, the specific way she was taught to walk and talk, the persona that was created by studios and publicists and acting coaches. Marilyn Monroe was a masterpiece of Hollywood engineering, and the woman inside that construction, Norma Jean, was sometimes lost in the process. When those medical files emerged in 2013, they provided concrete evidence of something scholars had long suspected, that Marilyn's transformation from Norma Jean to Marilyn Monroe had been more extensive and calculated than the public knew. The surgery wasn't a scandal, it was a revelation. It helped explain how a pretty girl from a troubled background became the most photographed woman of the 20th century. It showed the hidden machinery behind the Hollywood dream factory. And it humanized Marilyn in a way that the endless recycling of her glamour photographs never could, because now we knew she'd struggled with the same insecurities many women face. She'd looked in the mirror and seen flaws. She'd been told by professionals that she wasn't quite right for the camera. She'd made the decision to undergo surgery to fix those perceived flaws, and then she'd lived with the consequences, the physical pain and the burden of secrecy for the rest of her life. Marilyn Monroe's hidden chin surgery raises questions that extend far beyond Hollywood history. It makes us examine our own relationships with beauty and authenticity. In an age where Instagram filters and photo editing apps allow anyone to modify their appearance digitally, where cosmetic procedures are more common and accepted than ever before, Marilyn's story feels both distant and remarkably contemporary. She was navigating issues that we're still grappling with today. The pressure to meet certain beauty standards, the tension between natural appearance and enhanced beauty, the question of where we draw the line between self-improvement and self-deception, the psychological cost of maintaining an image that doesn't match reality. For the women of 1950s America who idolized Marilyn and tried to copy her look, the revelation of her surgery decades later was probably bittersweet. On one hand, it explained why they could never quite achieve that Marilyn look, no matter how much they bleached their hair or practiced her smile. On the other hand, it might have been validating to know that even Marilyn, with all her natural gifts, had needed help to become Marilyn Monroe. The face they'd been chasing was partly a medical construction, not just a gift of genetics. For contemporary audiences, the story serves as a reminder that the images we see in media are often more constructed than they appear. Marilyn's era had cosmetic surgery and careful lighting. Our era has Photoshop and filters and digital manipulation. The tools change, but the underlying dynamic remains the same: a gap between the image and the reality, and enormous pressure, especially on women, to present a certain kind of beauty to the world. Dr. Gurdin's medical notes, sitting in that auction house in 2013, were more than just historical documents. They were evidence of a system that demanded perfection and provided the means to achieve it, while simultaneously requiring that the means remain hidden. Marilyn underwent the surgery, maintained the secret, suffered the complications, and took it all to her grave. For 63 years, the illusion held, and when it finally cracked, what emerged wasn't a scandal, but a more complete, more human picture of a woman who'd been mythologized beyond recognition. The revelation didn't diminish Marilyn Monroe. If anything, it made her story more poignant, more relatable, more real, because now we knew the most beautiful woman in the world had looked in the mirror and seen flaws. The ultimate sex symbol had felt inadequate. The face that defined beauty for a generation had been carefully, painfully constructed, and she'd borne all of it alone, smiling for the cameras while managing secret pain, maintaining an image while struggling with the reality beneath it. That's the real story of Marilyn Monroe's chin surgery. Not just a medical procedure, but a window into the cost of fame, the construction of beauty, and the weight of secrets that Hollywood's golden age demanded its stars carry to their graves.